Hello, everyone. A very good evening. Can someone quickly confirm on the chat box if I am audible and visible or not? Hello, everyone. A very good evening. Can someone quickly confirm on the chat box if I am audible and visible or not? Hello, everyone. A very good evening. Can someone quickly confirm on the chat box if I am audible and visible or not? Hello, everyone. A very good evening. Can someone quickly confirm on the chat box if I am audible and visible or not? Hello, everyone. All right. So let's get started. A very interesting analysis this is going to be because as all of you know, IIM Kozhikode BMS admission test is happening for the first time. So I'm sure there are a lot of questions, there are a lot of doubts, there are a lot of intricacies that we need to know, a lot of questions going on in your mind. So first, let us quickly go through a brief analysis of today's session or today's test, and then I'll address your questions one by one. So if we look at the test structure of the exam, as all of us know, we have two sections. The first one, verbal ability, with 50 questions and 60 minutes, whereas the quantitative aptitude section is having 50 questions and a time limit of 60 minutes. So equal importance to both the sections, equal number of questions, equal duration, and equal marks. So the marking scheme was 3 marks for a right answer, and then -1 for a wrong answer. So there's a penalty of 1 mark for every mistake you make. And all the questions are essentially MCQs, multiple choice questions. Now, one interesting part is the syllabus that was mentioned on the IIM Kozhikode website when they announced the test format. There were a few changes, which I am sure all of you must have observed in the sample questions provided on the website as well. Particularly in the math section, arithmetic was missing in the list of topics they have mentioned as the part of the syllabus, but the sample paper had good number of questions from arithmetic. I think the same trend has continued in the actual exam as well. Now, in the verbal ability section, there were no changes. The questions were completely from those 3 different topics that were mentioned in the syllabus part. Important points to note before we get into discussion about each and every section. The interface of the test was very similar to IPMAT Indore. So students whoever have appeared for any of these exams earlier didn't have much challenge in adapting to the interface. Now there's an on-screen calculator, and also I was told by a few students that to use the on-screen calculator, you can also use the keyboard. I mean, to make calculations on the on-screen calculator, you can use the keyboard. I think for the on-screen calculator in most of the other exams, the challenge has been that in some tests, you can use only the mouse. Whereas in this test, a couple of students have mentioned that the keyboard was allowed to use, so which obviously helps in making certain calculations. Number 3, there is an interesting option that we have observed. In fact, this option was seen on the mock test link that IIM Kozhikode has uploaded, which is something called as notes. On the top right corner, there was this icon called notes. If you click on that, a small page kind of a thing opens, which is similar to a notepad or a stick notes. Now, how helpful it has been or what's the purpose of that is not something very clear. But maybe in case if there are certain points that students wanted to note down while solving a set or while solving a question, maybe in such cases it would have come in handy. And the happy thing to report is at least all the students that I have spoken to or we have discussed with, there were no glitches. So technically, the test went well. There were no challenges that students have faced, and it was a very smooth process. Now let's look at how each of the sections have been. Now the verbal ability section, if we see, as I was saying a minute ago, all the questions were from those three areas that were mentioned predominantly. Of course, there were a couple of questions from the domain of critical reasoning as well, but few. Now, there were three reading comprehension passages where I understand that the number of questions were around 14 to 16. So looks like three passages of 5 questions each. So 15 questions. And most of the students have reported, though the passages were doable, the options were quite tricky. So the options are what made the RCs slightly difficult to navigate through. Then comes grammar, which had all the usual types of questions. And it had more or less the maximum weightage in this particular section to the tune of around 16 to 18 questions. Idioms and vocabulary had almost 13 to 15 questions. And if you see, the type of questions in these were very similar to the standard ones. Question types included idioms, as you know, students who have prepared for IPMAT Indore would also agree with me that idioms has been one of those important segments for IPMAT Indore also. So there were a handful of questions on idioms, followed by questions on different other types of vocabulary-based questions like word usage, fill in the blanks, synonyms, antonyms, sort of. There were 4 questions which were reported by few students, which is from the area of critical reasoning, particularly questions which are similar to statements and conclusions. So more or less overall, not many surprises in the verbal ability section. Even the level of the questions were more or less on a moderate level. The questions were not very difficult, at the same time were not very easy. But because of more number of grammar and vocabulary based questions, I think even 50 questions in 60 minutes was not much difficult for students to at least go through all of them. So based on the feedback we have received from various students, we would like to keep the level of difficulty of the verbal ability section at easy to moderate level. Moderate predominantly because of the type of answer options or the type of questions that reading comprehension had. Whereas also vocabulary has its own challenges in terms of how well we are familiar with the words or not. For these two reasons, we keep the test at a level of easy to moderate, and the number of attempts, good number of attempts for someone who has prepared well for not only this test, but for all the other tests, we assume it should be around 43 to 45 plus. Goes without saying, at an accuracy of 85 to 90%. Now, before we move to the quantitative aptitude section, let me see if there are any questions that needs me to answer. Math only 13 questions, verbal 46 questions. Looks very difficult because verbal 46 items are good, as we discussed just now. If the accuracy is fine, I think verbal ability is sorted. But quant, I think 13 questions, even with 100% accuracy, is very, very unlikely. But there is always a chance for surprise because the test is happening for the first time. And also, since the exam is happening quite late and it's not an IPM, there are a lot of factors which might influence the cutoff or the number of takers. So let's hope for the best. But at the outset, I think it's very difficult to expect an interview call with 13 questions in the math section and 46 questions in the verbal section. Now, moving on to the next part, that is the quantitative aptitude section. Now, this, I think they have more or less done justice to almost all the areas. Now, the topics were pretty much the topics which anyone would have studied till their 10th standard. There were hardly any questions from higher math. So if we look at the various types of questions that were there in each of the areas, so we have understood that based on the reports we have got, that the approximate number of questions from each of the areas stand at this point. Now, arithmetic and geometry seems to have dominated the section, with modern math very close by, whereas numbers and algebra were not having as many questions as the others. Now, arithmetic had a lot of questions ranging from profit loss, ratios. Then there were questions on simple compound interest, averages, time, speed, and distance. In fact, interesting thing, looks like in both the sections, that is both verbal ability as well as quantitative aptitude, there are a handful of questions which were either from the IMS material or PYQs, which means past year questions. A few students have reported that a couple of questions from the verbal section as well as the math section were exactly same as certain questions that they have seen in one of the previous years of IPMAT Indore, as well as some of the questions were very similar or exactly same as what they have seen in the IMS material. In fact, one student has also given us a question on time, speed, and distance, which was almost same as what we have in our basic concept class. So going back to the different topics that were covered in each of these areas, geometry seems to have a handful of questions on mensuration. Interesting thing, there were questions on coordinate geometry. Almost 40 to 50% of the questions from geometry were reported to be from mensuration. Modern math, I think, had questions from different topics like statistics, probability. Then we have sequences and series. Progressions looks like there were almost 5-6 questions on arithmetic progression, geometric progression, etc. There were 4 to 5 questions on logarithms. So in a way, I think they have covered most of the ground and they have given almost equal weightage to all those important topics. And good thing is that we didn't have any questions from higher level math. So considering the type of questions, the level of difficulty, and the feedback we have received from various students, we would like to categorize the level of difficulty of the quantitative aptitude section as easy to moderate. And considering the same feedback, we assume or we predict the good number of attempts in this particular section to be around 38 to 40 plus. Now, for someone who has gone through the IMS modules, the courseware books, thoroughly, have learned the concepts and have practiced the exercises, I was told that most of these questions were very easy to answer. It's just that some of the questions were lengthy, because of which they took time. But anyone who has spent enough time on the IMS ecosystem with respect to the material or mock test, more or less would have been able to sail through in today's test without much difficulty. In fact, we have also got feedback from various students that the IMS mocks were slightly difficult than the actual exam, which made it very easy for them to catch up on the number of questions in the test and attempt good number of questions, maintaining a comfortable level of accuracy. Now, moving to the last part, which is, I'm sure, something that you are most excited about. Now, since there is no information as on date from IMK, whether there would be sectional cutoffs or overall cutoffs, but considering the fact that there is a hard time limit on each of the sections, like you'll have to spend 60 minutes on verbal and 60 minutes on quant. So hence, at this juncture, we would like to announce section-specific cutoffs. Now, verbal ability, as we have discussed during that particular section, an attempt of around 42 to 44 plus with 85-90% accuracy should put your score somewhere between 105 to 112, which we expect to be the cutoff. And the quantitative aptitude section, which we assume the ideal number of attempts should be around 38-40 plus, with 85-90% accuracy should put your score somewhere close to 100 marks. So based on our analysis and feedback, this is the cutoff that we are announcing for both the verbal ability as well as the quantitative aptitude section. So with that, I think we more or less come to an end to this analysis. Now, let me see if there are any questions that needs my answer. Okay. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to put it on the chat box. I'll be more than happy to answer. Would 192 around in total be good? Ashish, yes, 192 overall seems to be a decently good score. I mean, very close to the cutoff. But as I mentioned, a lot of factors at play, like the exam being conducted for the first time and other factors. Let's hope for the best. But I think, you can be hopeful of being able to clear the cutoffs. So there is no information about sectional cutoff or overall cutoff. Hence, at this point of time, we have announced the sectional cutoff because each section has 1 hour of pre-decided time. Yeah, if they are not looking at a sectional cutoff, Ashish, 192 seems to be a very close score as per our expected cutoff. If there are sectional cutoffs, then we need to see how much you're scoring in each of the sections. When will the results come? I think it might take probably a week or 10 days for the results to be announced. That's the usual timeline, but let's see how it is. All right, then. I think I have answered all the questions that are there. All the best, and I hope to see you guys in one of the upcoming sessions. Bye-bye. Take care. The bare minimum, maybe if things go very positive, you can probably expect the cutoff to drop by 5 to 10%. So if we are expecting the overall cutoff to be around 200 as per IMS's calculation, then probably we might have a chance till 180, 185. 170 at this point of time, 160 or 170 looks very unlikely. So at least from our end, we are not very positive about the fact that it might go down to 160, 170. Let's wait and see. For EWS category, yes, I think for EWS category, the cutoff can probably be around 15% less than this. So maybe if we are saying 200, then around 160, 160-ish can be the cutoff for EWS category. Okay. All right then. See you guys. Bye-bye. All the best.